A young student marries a 68-year-old millionaire for her money, but he was left speechless when he discovered what she had planned. Before the story begins, comment below which city you're watching the video from. We love getting to know our viewers. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss more exciting stories. Enjoy the story and see you soon. Have you ever felt like your life could change in an instant? As if a strange destiny pushed you to make a decision you didn't even know you were capable of making. That's what I felt when my phone buzzed that night. And although I had nothing left to lose, that simple notification pulled me into an abyss I never imagined. The rain pounded the streets of the university town. Lucas Martinez walked slowly along the sidewalk of the main avenue, his shoes soaked and his coat barely holding on to the little hope he had left. A 22-year-old law student, his life had become an exhausting routine of endless classes, a modest, poorly paid internship, and the growing debts for his mother's treatment, Ana Martinez, who was battling a rare illness. Anxiety surrounded him like a thick fog, and the pressure to keep his family afloat had pushed him to the brink of collapse. But that night, when everything seemed lost, something changed. His phone buzzed in the pocket of his jacket, a text from an unknown number. Lucas frowned and cautiously read it. "Lucas, I'm Beatriz Rodriguez. If you want to save your family, we need to talk. I'll be waiting for you at Café Central at 8:00 p.m. He stood still for a moment. Beatriz Rodriguez? He didn't know her personally, but the name sounded vaguely familiar. Maybe he had heard it in some news related to the business world. Beatriz Rodriguez was one of the most powerful women in Mexico, the owner of one of the largest tech companies in the country. What could she possibly want from a young student like him? A few minutes later, Lucas stood in front of Café Central. The place, dimly lit by the streetlights, seemed deserted. The rain had let up, but the humidity in the air chilled him to the bone. He walked towards the entrance, and as he opened the door, the sound of the bells signaling the arrival of customers echoed in the emptiness. Beatriz Rodriguez was there, sitting at a table in the back. Her presence was imposing, even without saying a word. At 68 years old, she carried herself with the poise and gaze of a woman who had conquered the business world with cunning and determination. Her face bore the marks of time, but her cold, calculating eyes revealed that there was no room for weakness in her soul. Lucas approached, nervous, not knowing what to expect. "Lucas," Beatrice began in a low voice, offering no further explanations. "I know what you're going through. You have unpayable debts, your mother is gravely ill, and I don't see how you can get out of this hole without help. But I can help you. You just have to accept an offer." "What kind of offer?" Lucas could barely articulate, his heart racing 1,000 beats per minute. Beatrice stared at him, a barely perceptible smile on her lips. "Marry me." "Pardon?" The incredulity in Lucas's voice was evident. He couldn't believe what he had just heard. "You heard right," Beatrice said, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. "I'm not interested in a romance, Lucas. What I need is a contract. I need a husband who will help me secure the future of my empire when I'm no longer here. In exchange, I will pay off all your debts, guarantee your mother and sister's well-being, and secure your financial stability. I don't want love. I want a signature." Lucas was frozen. What kind of madness was this? Such an absurd proposal to a young student like him. "Why me?" Lucas asked, fear starting to take over him. "Why did you choose me?" Beatrice leaned slightly forward, her eyes gleaming with a mix of coldness and resolve. "Because you're the only option I have. You can't refuse, Lucas. If you do, this offer will disappear forever. I'm not giving you another chance." Lucas felt a knot in his stomach. What could he do? His thoughts were racing in all directions, but the truth was simple. He had no choice. The bills were piling up. His mother was slowly dying. and if he didn't make a decision, his family would sink. Beatrice's offer was terrifying, but it might be the only way out. "I'll think about it," Lucas finally said, though deep down he knew there was no turning back. That night, as he walked back to his apartment, Lucas couldn't stop thinking about what Beatrice had offered him. Was he selling his soul? A sense of being trapped engulfed him, but there was also a strange sense of relief. Maybe, just maybe, he had found a way out. But the price? What would the price be for all of this? The next morning, the sun shone weakly over the city. Lucas woke up with a strange feeling, as though he was still trapped in a dream. He got up quickly, the weight of the conversation with Beatrice still heavy on his shoulders. The decision he had to make couldn't wait, but every time he thought about it, his stomach churned. Ana Martinez, his mother, was lying in her bed, resting from another day of treatment. The doctors had told him there wasn't much more they could do. Her rare illness was advancing without remedy, and Lucas had exhausted all options to get the money he needed. The thought of losing her was unbearable, and yet Beatrice was offering him a possibility, a way out. He approached his mother's bed, gently stroking her hair and looking into her eyes. The woman, now 50, was no longer the same. The illness had transformed her, but her spirit remained strong. "Mom," Lucas began, his voice cracking, "I promise I'll do everything I can to make sure you're okay. I'm not giving up." Anna looked up, her eyes full of tears. She knew her son was fighting a war he couldn't win. "Son, life is full of tough decisions. Maybe this is one of them. I don't want you to suffer because of me, but I know you'd do anything to save us. Take your time, but think carefully." Lucas took a deep breath. Think carefully. Those words echoed in his head as he left the room. Beatrice's proposal was stripping away his calm, but there was something more at stake. He couldn't let his mother fall, but he also couldn't get trapped in a web of lies. That day, as he walked across the university campus, he thought of all the alternatives he had. He stopped in front of a coffee shop and saw a sign with the word opportunity. He wasn't sure what it meant, but life seemed to offer him the same thing, a difficult opportunity, hard to refuse, but impossible to fully understand. It was noon when Lucas received another text message. This time, it was from Beatrice. "Have you made a decision? Time is running out." The message shook him. He had no more time for doubts. At that moment, the young man understood he couldn't let the opportunity Beatrice offered slip away. He had sacrificed so much for his family throughout his life, and if there was one thing he didn't want to lose, it was hope. Soon after, he found himself in front of the notary's office. The decision had been made. However, something didn't feel right. The woman he had met at Café Central wasn't just a successful businesswoman. Something in her cold, calculating gaze told him Beatrice had more secrets than she was willing to share. But what surprised him most was how the proposal seemed to be wrapped in dark pacts, as if there were forces behind it that Lucas couldn't comprehend. When Beatrice handed him the contract to sign, Lucas read each word carefully. There were no mysterious clauses, no obvious surprises, but the discomfort he felt was palpable. The contract wasn't about love or marriage, it was a transaction. An agreement between two people who didn't truly know each other, but needed each other desperately. "Sign here," Beatrice said, pointing to the final line of the contract, "and everything you've dreamed of, you'll have." Lucas trembled. The decision was right in front of him. Finally, with the pen in hand, he signed the paper. He didn't know if he was sealing his fate or his mother's, but something inside told him this was the only path, the only way to salvation. But as soon as he signed, Beatrice took the contract, put it away with a smile Lucas couldn't interpret, and said, "Welcome to the family, Lucas." The first day as Beatrice's husband was strange. Although everything seemed to be following the contract, The atmosphere around it was full of tension. Lucas was invited to Beatrice's mansion, a place that exuded power and wealth. The staff treated him with a respect he didn't understand, as if he were part of a world he had never touched. When he sat with Beatrice in the mansion's main room, she stared at him and said, "Now all you have to do is stay in this role as my husband. I'm not asking for more. Don't expect me to treat you like a normal person. Remember, this is not a regular marriage." Lucas nodded, feeling a mix of confusion and relief, but at the same time, he couldn't stop thinking about what he had left behind, and above all, about what Beatrice had not told him. The morning after the contract was signed, Lucas woke up in a room he didn't recognize. The walls of Beatrice's mansion were imposing, decorated with modern art and luxurious furniture that reflected the power and fortune of his new wife. The noise of the city seemed distant, as if all the chaos that had followed him up to that point had disappeared the moment he crossed that door. He sat on the bed, trying to process what he had done. "Today begins my new life," he thought. But as the hours passed, he realized that the rules of this new world were as foreign to him as the stars in the sky. Everything he had known, the university, his friends, his family, no longer seemed to matter. Now, everything came down to a signature. Beatrice had summoned him for lunch in her office, a minimalist space with large windows overlooking a perfectly kept garden. The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, but Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that something dark lingered in the room. "I've called you here to discuss your new responsibilities," Beatrice said, sitting across from him, crossing her legs with an intimidating elegance. "Now that you're part of my life, I want you to understand how everything works. The first thing you need to know is that you won't be alone. The world around you is changing, Lucas. What you do now will influence my empire." Lucas looked at her, feeling a chill run down his spine. "What do you want me to do?" he asked, his voice slightly trembling. He felt that even though he had signed, he still didn't fully understand what he was getting into. Beatrice gave him a cold smile. "I want you to start attending my meetings, learn how business is done. You need to understand how we operate. The image you project outwardly will be key. But remember one thing, Lucas. This is an act. Don't look for affection, don't look for emotions. Just play your part." Beatrice's words were clear, but that didn't loosen the knot in Lucas's stomach. Throughout the afternoon, he attended several meetings where, as an observer, he saw the absolute control Beatrice had over her empire. At every word that came from her mouth, the executives and partners seemed to submit without question. She was not just a successful businesswoman, she was a ruthless strategist, able to control everyone around her like pieces on a chessboard. Despite her apparent emotional distance, Lucas couldn't help but feel an increasing admiration for Beatrice, though mistrust also tormented him. What was this game she was playing? He wasn't a pawn, or at least he didn't want to be. That same night, Lucas met Beatrice again, this time in the mansion's backyard. Warm lights illuminated the place, creating an atmosphere of mystery. Lucas walked behind her, still trying to adapt to his new life. Beatrice, without looking at him, continued her speech. "It's important that you understand the situation. Ricardo Torres, my ex-husband, is not someone you can underestimate. Even though we're no longer married, he is still a threat. If he finds out about our arrangement, he could make your life a living hell. You need to maintain appearances, Lucas. If you play your cards right, your family will be safe." The name Ricardo Torres echoed in Lucas's mind like a distant echo. Beatrice's ex-husband, a tech mogul. He had heard of him in the news, always surrounded by scandals, but he never imagined he would be caught in the middle of that story. "What do you want me to do with him?" Lucas asked, nervous. Beatrice looked at him for the first time that night, with an intensity that made him feel small. "Nothing. Just keep him away from us. Don't worry about Ricardo. He has his own problems, but I handle him. Lucas knew that what Beatrice was telling him was only part of the truth. There was something in her tone that told him she wasn't sharing the full story. But that night, as he retired to his room, doubts began to consume him. Who was Beatriz Rodriguez really, and how entangled was he in her games? The next day, Lucas began attending more meetings and business dinners, always with the same directive: observe, learn, and most importantly, maintain appearances. But at every moment, the feeling of being trapped in an invisible web grew stronger. Beatrice hadn't just integrated him into her world. She had submerged him in an ocean of secrets he was just beginning to understand. Their relationship remained pure facade. Sometimes, Lucas wondered if Beatrice truly saw him as an ally or just another tool in her fight to regain full control over her life and fortune. And worst of all, Lucas was beginning to question whether he truly cared. Days passed slowly, but for Lucas each one felt like a new challenge, an unsolvable riddle. Beatrice maintained absolute control over his life, guiding him down a dark path where the rules seemed to change constantly. Every time he thought he understood how everything worked, something new arose to confuse him. One afternoon, Lucas was called to a private meeting in Beatrice's office, an austere, almost clinical space with large bookshelves filled with documents and trophies that attested to her success. Despite the magnitude of her fortune, the place lacked any decoration that could suggest a life beyond business. No family photos, nothing that suggested warmth or humanity. Beatrice was sitting behind her desk, staring at papers with a fixed gaze. She didn't seem surprised to see him enter. She didn't even give him a smile. It was as if everything was part of a protocol, a mechanism that no longer evoked any emotion. "Lucas, I want you to take care of something today," Beatrice said bluntly, as if assigning a trivial task. "I'm going to make a couple of calls, but you're going to meet a man. His name is Mario Garcia. Don't ask too many questions. Just do what he says." Lucas frowned, not knowing what to think. "A man? What do you want me to do with him?" Beatrice looked up, and her eyes, usually cold, hardened. "It's a delicate matter. Don't worry about the details, just do as you're told. Then, come back and tell me what happened." Without leaving room for more questions, Beatrice turned back to her papers, as if she no longer cared what he might say. Confused and slightly uneasy, Lucas left the office, feeling the uncertainty take over him. A few hours later, he found himself in a luxury restaurant, one of those places where important people do business in secret. The place was dark, with tables separated by thick curtains and soft background music. Lucas scanned the room, looking for Mario Garcia. At once, a tall, slender man stood up from a table in the farthest corner. He had dark, short hair and an expression of someone who wasn't afraid of being watched. He approached Lucas with a calculated smile. "Lucas Martinez," he said with a neutral accent, shaking his hand. "I imagine Beatrice has told you about me." Lucas nodded, still unsure of what to expect. "Yes, but she hasn't exactly told me what she wants me to do." Mario sat down without waiting for Lucas to take a seat. "The important thing is that you follow the instructions. The situation with Ricardo Torres is getting complicated, and Beatrice needs to make sure everything is under control. You're part of that operation now, so I suggest you don't ask questions. Got it?" Lucas felt his stomach tighten. Ricardo Torres. It was the second time he had heard that name, and the second time he felt something dark looming over him. "Control of what?" Lucas asked, trying not to show his discomfort. Mario looked at him intently for a moment, then smiled again. "That's something you don't need to know just yet. Just make sure to follow the orders I'll give you. Everything will be taken care of, but if you do something out of line, Beatrice won't hesitate to make the consequences reach your family. You, your mother, and your sister are not beyond her reach." Those words hit him like a bucket of cold water. For a moment, Lucas felt the weight of the threat upon him. Beatrice had not only manipulated him for her own benefit, but now Mario seemed to be the messenger of an imminent danger. At that moment, Lucas realized that even though he had married Beatrice out of necessity, he was not the only one trapped in this web of power. Without further words, Mario handed him a sealed envelope. "Take this to Beatrice's office. Don't open it. It's crucial that she receives it directly. Do you understand?" Lucas nodded, not daring to ask anything else. Fear started to take over him as he grabbed the envelope. As he stood up to leave, Mario stopped him for a moment. "Remember, Lucas, in this game, no one can get out. If you decide to do something against Beatrice, the consequences will be definitive." Lucas walked quickly towards the exit of the restaurant, feeling the weight of the envelope in his hand as if it were a ticking time bomb. What was in that envelope? Why had Mario spoken to him with such threats? The uncertainty consumed him. Back at the mansion, Lucas went straight to Beatrice's office. When he handed her the envelope, Beatrice barely looked at him, took it, and placed it in a drawer. Then, without saying anything, she turned to face him. "Well done, Lucas. You're starting to understand how this works." The tension in the air was palpable. Lucas didn't know what to expect. Despite his firm resolve to stay in control of his destiny, the threat still loomed over his life like an invisible shadow. And the worst part was that he didn't know who was really behind all of this. Beatrice, Ricardo, Mario. No one seemed to be what they claimed to be. And the trap was closing in tighter and tighter, while Lucas began to wonder if there was any way out of it. Lucas had never been a paranoid person. However, the situation he had found himself in since marrying Beatrice was starting to affect his mind in ways he couldn't control. The constant feeling of being watched, the uncertainty of not knowing who was manipulating what, or even who was truly on his side, was pushing him to his limits. The day after the mysterious delivery of the envelope, Lucas found himself in Beatrice's office, watching her as she, without even looking around, reviewed documents and answered phone calls with an efficiency that almost bordered on the inhuman. The days in the mansion had passed without major changes, except that his social life was reduced to meetings and working dinners with powerful people, mostly men with interests Lucas couldn't even understand. But that morning, Beatrice called him in for something different. Unlike other occasions, this time she wasn't working. She was sitting with her arms crossed on the table, staring at him intently. "I need you to do something else for me, Lucas," she said, with no sign of affection or cordiality. "Ricardo has started to suspect. It's time for you to confront him." Lucas felt a knot in his stomach upon hearing his name. "Confront Ricardo? How?" he asked, alarmed. The thought of facing a man like Ricardo Torres terrified him, especially without a clear plan. Beatrice looked at him and her eyes softened, though her expression remained calculating. "Don't worry. It won't be a physical confrontation. I need you to go to a meeting with him. You'll go under a pretext, but what I really want is for you to set in motion a plan to gain his trust. You need to prove you can be useful to him." Lucas didn't understand anything. "How can I gain the trust of a man like Ricardo?" Beatrice stood up from the table, walking to the window. "That's what I'll handle. You just go to the meeting. Do as he tells you. You have to seem trustworthy. And more importantly, you need to seem indispensable." Lucas remained silent, processing what Beatrice had said. How could he convince a ruthless magnate like Ricardo Torres that he needed him? And if he succeeded, what would happen afterward? Would he just be another pawn in an even bigger game? That afternoon, Lucas prepared for his encounter with Ricardo. He didn't know what to expect, but there was something inside him that told him things would never be that simple. As he headed to the restaurant where he had agreed to meet the magnate, the feeling of being part of something much bigger than him grew stronger. The restaurant was even more exclusive than the previous one. The luxurious decor couldn't mask the tense atmosphere in the air. Ricardo Torres was already there, sitting at a private table facing the horizon. He was a tall man with a severe face and a presence that demanded respect. When he saw Lucas enter, he raised an eyebrow as if he had been expecting him. "Lucas Martinez," Ricardo said with a deep voice, almost like an echo. "Beatriz has told me a lot about you." Lucas, slightly nervous, extended his hand to greet him. "A pleasure, Mr. Torres." Ricardo nodded but didn't shake his hand. "Please sit. Let's talk business." The meeting started like any other business gathering, but Lucas soon realized that Ricardo wasn't talking about any transaction or deal. Instead, the magnate began to question him directly. "Tell me, Lucas, why did you agree to marry Beatriz?" he asked, locking eyes with him. Lucas was speechless for a moment. How should he respond? She offered me an opportunity, something my family needed," he said, with a sincerity that he hoped would be convincing. Ricardo smiled slightly, as if evaluating each word. "Beatriz is an interesting woman, very calculating. But sometimes people do things for reasons that can't be understood. What surprises me is that you, so young, got involved in this world without even thinking twice." Lucas, somewhat uncomfortable, didn't know how to react. The conversation continued in a superficial manner, touching on business topics that Lucas didn't fully understand, but the objective of the meeting was clear. Ricardo was assessing Lucas, and he was very interested in seeing how useful Lucas could be to him. At the end of the night, after several minutes of empty talk, Ricardo stood up and extended his hand to Lucas, this time with a more friendly gesture. "You did well to show up. Stay close to Beatriz, but remember that in this game no one has friends, only temporary allies. We'll see each other again, Lucas, and when that happens I hope you know which side you're playing on." Lucas left the restaurant feeling strange, as if he had been part of a game he still didn't fully understand. What did Ricardo want from him? And what had that comment about temporary allies meant? Something didn't add up. When he returned to the mansion, Lucas found Beatriz waiting for him. Despite what he had just experienced, he didn't feel free to ask questions. Beatriz, as always, already had everything under control. "How was the meeting?" Beatriz asked, almost without lifting her eyes from the papers in front of her. Lucas took a deep breath, still processing everything that had happened. "Ricardo is testing me, Beatriz. I don't know what else he wants, but he made it clear that there's no room for mistakes." Beatriz looked at him, and for the first time, Lucas saw a spark of something different in her eyes. It wasn't cold or calculating, it was something deeper. "I know, and that's why we need you, Lucas. You have to play him, just like everyone else." Lucas nodded, feeling that he had no other choice but to play along. But inside him, one question kept haunting him. Whose game was this, really? The days following the meeting with Ricardo were a whirlwind of events, but Lucas still couldn't shake the feeling of walking on mined ground. Every step he took seemed to take him deeper into a world he didn't fully understand, where every smile hid a threat, and every conversation was a move in a deadly chess game. Beatriz, for her part, kept her emotional distance. Even though she showed no mercy in her dealings with Lucas, something in her attitude changed when the topic turned to her empire and her confrontation with Ricardo. It was evident that the woman was playing a much bigger game than Lucas had imagined, and he, in his ignorance, was just a piece being moved without knowing exactly where he stood. One afternoon, after a series of tedious meetings with Beatriz's lawyers and executives, Lucas returned to the mansion. He was exhausted, both mentally and emotionally. He sat down on the sofa in the living room, but when he tried to relax, a letter he had found in Beatriz's office made him jump out of his seat. The letter was carefully sealed with a symbol Lucas didn't recognize, but what worried him was the sender, Ricardo Torres. The writing at the top of the letter was clear, "To Beatriz Rodriguez, without anyone knowing." Intrigued, Lucas didn't hesitate for a second and tore open the envelope. What he found inside was a carefully written document, but what really caught his attention was the tone. It seemed to be a direct message for Beatrice, a message full of veiled threats, but also a revelation. The document detailed a series of steps and strategies that Ricardo had been using in his fight against Beatrice. But what shocked Lucas the most was the last line. "I told you, Beatrice, he who plays with me plays with fire. And now your husband is just another pawn. I've been watching you, I've used you, and now I'll use your husband to get what I want." A chill ran down Lucas's spine. What did he mean by that? Why was his name involved in Ricardo's plan for revenge? Before he could process it, the door opened and Beatrice walked into the room. When she saw him holding the letter, she didn't seem surprised. Instead, her expression remained calm, as if she had expected Lucas to find the message. "You already knew, didn't you?" Beatrice said, looking directly into Lucas's eyes. "You knew Ricardo would never accept losing, but now you know that your life and the lives of everyone you care about are in danger." Lucas felt the air grow heavy. He didn't know whether to feel betrayed or if he should blame himself for all of this. What kind of life was he living now? And most importantly, how could he escape this spiral without losing everything he had left? "This isn't just a business game, Lucas," Beatrice continued, her voice taking on a much more serious tone. "Ricardo doesn't play fair, and by marrying me, you've become an important part of his game. But he doesn't know that you're also a pawn, just like me. A pawn that can still be moved." Lucas didn't understand why. After everything Beatrice had said and done, she still saw him as just another piece in her plan. He didn't like being considered anything more than a tool in the battle between the two magnates. But before he could say anything, Beatrice interrupted him. "You'll have to decide, Lucas. You can't keep being so naive. What I'm asking you to do isn't easy, but it's necessary. I need you to get closer to Ricardo. The only thing you can do now is play his game. Convince him that you're loyal to him, that you've chosen his side." "His side?" Lucas repeated, his voice trembling. "How can I do that without completely losing myself in this game of revenge?" Beatrice looked at him steadily. "Because, Lucas, if you don't do it, Ricardo's revenge will be far more lethal than any threat I could make to you, and you'll lose everything. But if you play your cards right, you'll have control over the situation." Lucas fell silent, processing the gravity of what Beatrice was asking. Was he willing to become a traitor to save his family? And what would happen when he discovered that Beatrice herself had been manipulating him from the beginning, using his fears and weaknesses to make him play this dangerous game? The temptation to give in to Beatrice's pressure and go along with her was great, but something inside Lucas still resisted. The idea of losing his identity in the name of survival horrified him. With a mixture of uncertainty and fear, Lucas stood up from the sofa, determined to act, but knowing that whatever decision he made would bring him closer to the abyss. He felt trapped, as if he had no choice but to follow the path Beatrice had laid out for him. But as always, he couldn't stop asking himself what would happen when he discovered the true cost of this game of revenge. The clock struck midnight when Lucas left Beatrice's office. He had spent hours discussing the final details of his mission with her, or rather, enduring her cold and calculating presence while trying to digest the magnitude of what he was being asked to do. Despite the arguments, the pressures, the veiled threats, something inside him still resisted. He didn't fully understand the role he was playing, but he knew he was at the center of something much bigger than himself. Something that overwhelmed him. As he walked through the mansion's hallways, his phone vibrated in his pocket. It was a message, one he hadn't expected to receive. "Lucas, I know you're going through something difficult, but there's still time to get out of this. I need to see you. It's urgent. Ricardo." The mere mention of Ricardo made his stomach tighten. What did he want now? Was it another threat, or just another move in his endless struggle with Beatriz? He didn't think too much about it. It was late, and he knew the confrontation was inevitable. He had felt it in the air from day one. This game, in the end, had no winners, only survivors. That same night, Lucas set out for the restaurant where Ricardo had asked to meet him. As he drove, his mind was filled with contradictory thoughts. What did Ricardo know about him? How could he be so sure that Lucas was just another piece in his plan? When he arrived at the place, a luxurious restaurant on the outskirts of the city, Lucas was greeted by a stern-faced man who led him directly to a private table. There, waiting, was Ricardo, the same man Lucas had seen on the news, a magnate with a cold, calculating look capable of destroying empires with a single word. But what surprised Lucas the most was Ricardo's demeanor. He wasn't the vengeful, resentful man Lucas had expected. Instead, he was calm, serene, even almost friendly. "Lucas, I'm glad you came," Ricardo said with a tense smile. "I know things haven't been easy for you, but I want to talk to you about something important, something Beatriz hasn't told you." The statement hit like a low blow. Beatriz had been so meticulous in her schemes, so careful with her moves, that Lucas hadn't expected someone like Ricardo to be able to surprise him. And yet, there it was, a new twist in the story that made him wonder how deep the hole he was in really was. "Beatriz and I," Ricardo continued in a grave tone, "we had a complex but also strategic relationship. The divorce wasn't just a personal matter. She had plans. And you, Lucas, are part of those plans. Everything that's happening now, everything you've experienced since you accepted her proposal, has been carefully designed. You're just a piece in her revenge." Lucas remained silent, feeling the air around him grow heavier. Each word from Ricardo seemed to shatter the assumptions he had held up until that moment. Had Beatriz been manipulating him all this time? Had he, in reality, been part of a much bigger plan that he had no idea about? "But not all is lost," Ricardo continued, watching Lucas's reaction. "I can help you get out of this. You just have to listen to me and stop being a pawn in her game. I know what she's plotting, Lucas, and if you join me, we could destroy her from the inside." The cold sweat that began to trickle down Lucas's back pulled him out of his state of shock. What was Ricardo saying? What did joining him mean at this point? The proposition seemed tempting, but at the same time, the danger was clear. Accepting Ricardo's help could mean betraying everything Lucas had believed until now. "What do you expect from me?" Lucas asked, his voice now a whisper but full of distrust. Ricardo looked at him intently, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just follow my plan. I know Beatriz hasn't told you the whole truth, Lucas. She has used you to gain control of what belongs to her. What you think is a marriage contract to save your family is, in reality, a trap that only benefits Beatriz. But if you are willing to do the right thing, I can help you strike back." Ricardo's words floated in the room like a rope thrown towards him. The dilemma was simple, yet terrifying. He could join Ricardo, which would mean betraying Beatriz, but it would also give him control over his destiny, his life, and his family's future. On the other hand, there was the other option. Stay in Beatriz's game, pretend to be her ally, and hope that at some point she would show him an escape. "What I'm offering you isn't just money or power, Lucas," Ricardo said, leaning toward him. "What I'm offering you is the chance to destroy Beatriz, to free yourself from her control, and to take back what's rightfully yours." The conversation was set, and Lucas knew that any decision he made that night would change the course of his life. There was no turning back. Fate was waiting. The decision was made. Lucas had heard Ricardo's words, considered his options, but something inside him told him that this was not the right path. He couldn't trust anyone in this world of deceit, not even his own reflection. But despite his doubts, he couldn't deny that Ricardo's offer resonated deep within him. 2 days had passed since the meeting with Ricardo, and Lucas found himself once again in his apartment, staring at his phone, but unwilling to answer Beatrice's calls. Ricardo's words still echoed in his mind. Beatrice has used you all this time. She's turned you into her pawn. And while Ricardo's offer seemed tempting, Lucas knew he couldn't play with fire. If he accepted Ricardo's help, he might get trapped in a revenge plot that would consume him entirely. But one night, as he was returning from university, Lucas received a message that changed everything. "Lucas, we need to talk. It's urgent. I'm waiting for you at my office at 10 p.m. You can't miss this. Beatrice." The message made him doubt. What did she want now? Was it a trap, or did she really need his help for something bigger? Without thinking twice, Lucas decided to go, knowing he was stepping into dangerous territory. His heart raced as he drove to the place where Beatrice had asked him to meet. When he arrived at Beatrice's office, everything was silent. The massive glass desk was empty, and the only light came from a lamp on Beatrice's desk. As he entered, she looked at him steadily, as if she already knew what he was thinking. "Lucas, I know you've been talking to Ricardo," Beatrice said, her tone firm and cold. "I know what he's promised you, and I know what you're thinking." Lucas looked at her in confusion. How could Beatrice know about his meeting with Ricardo? "What Ricardo offered you is a lie. Don't worry, I'm not going to tell you to forget about him. I understand you need to evaluate all your options. But I want you to know something. He isn't offering you what it seems. It's a dirty game, Lucas. Everything he's doing is part of his revenge against me. If you follow that path, you'll be trapped in his web, and you won't be able to get out." Lucas watched her in silence, feeling the weight in the air. Every word from Beatrice seemed to hold more mystery, but at the same time, something in her gaze told him he couldn't trust her completely. But what did he have to lose? "What I'm offering you, Lucas," Beatrice continued, "is the opportunity to take control. I'll give you the power to do whatever you want, to destroy Ricardo, to protect your family. You have everything you need to take control of your destiny, but only if you work with me. You're not a pawn, you're a key piece in a much bigger game." Lucas's heart raced. The idea of taking control, of having the power to destroy Ricardo, was tempting. He knew Beatrice had her own interests, but he couldn't deny that she was right about one thing. His life no longer fully belonged to him. He was trapped, surrounded by forces greater than him. "Why should I trust you?" Lucas asked, a mix of doubt and frustration in his voice. "What guarantees do I have that I'm not being manipulated again?" Beatrice stood up from her chair and walked toward him. Her steps were firm and sure, as if each movement was calculated. She stopped in front of him, looking at him intensely. "Because, Lucas, I'm going to give you something that Ricardo could never offer you, the truth. And the truth is the only thing that will free you from this game. If you work with me, if you really want to get out of all this, I'll help you discover who Ricardo really is and what he really wants." Lucas felt a growing pressure in his chest. The idea of getting answers consumed him. Who was Ricardo really? Why so much hatred toward Beatrice? And why, in the middle of all this chaos, did it seem like he was trapped between two unstoppable forces? "I give you 24 hours to decide, Lucas," Beatrice said, her voice calm but with an implicit threat. "If you decide you want to know the truth, come to me. If you choose to follow Ricardo, you'll be taking a path with no return." Before Lucas could say anything, Beatrice left the office, leaving him alone with his thoughts. He was at a crossroads. He knew the decisions he made in the next few hours would change his life forever. The dawn found Lucas caught in a storm of thoughts. Beatrice's words echoed in his head like a hammering sound he couldn't escape. "If you choose to follow Ricardo, you'll be taking a path with no return." That threat resonated with an unsettling truth. In his world, the roads were no longer straight or easy. He couldn't make decisions without them having devastating consequences. However, the idea of the truth drew him in like a magnet. From the first day, he had felt that something was off in his relationship with Beatrice, that there were pieces of the puzzle that just didn't fit. What had really happened between her and Ricardo? Why had she agreed to marry him, a complete stranger, instead of just fixing things on her own? Was he being used in a game he didn't even understand? At 9 a.m., Lucas was already in his car, driving to Beatrice's mansion. The rain had started falling, and the sound of the drops on the roof accompanied him as he reflected on what he was about to do. He had decided that he wanted to know the truth, no matter how hard it might be. He couldn't keep being a puppet for two titans in a war he didn't fully understand. He had to understand the past between Beatrice and Ricardo to be able to make a decision. When he arrived, Beatrice was waiting for him in the foyer. The mansion seemed darker than usual, as if the weight of the decisions and lies that had accumulated there had darkened every corner. Her gaze, always cold and calculating, didn't show surprise at seeing him. Instead, there was a sense of contained satisfaction. "Lucas, I'm glad you came. I warned you. The truth always comes at a price. But what I didn't tell you is that some truths can destroy you." Her voice was calm, but there was an undertone of warning in her words. Lucas looked at her steadily, ready to face whatever was coming. He had no other choice. "I want to know everything, Beatrice. I want to know why Ricardo dragged me into this game. What's really going on between you two?" Beatrice paused and then pointed toward the door of a nearby office. "Come, there's something you need to see." Beatrice's office was as imposing as everything else in the mansion. Dark wood furniture, carefully stacked books, and a large glass table in the center. Beatrice approached a desk and pulled out a thick envelope. She opened it and, with a mechanical gesture, handed Lucas a letter. "The letter Ricardo sent you recently, telling you he would help you destroy me, is just a piece of a much larger game. This," she said, pointing to the letter, "is what's really going on. The game you've been playing isn't just mine or Ricardo's. It's much more complicated than that. And you, Lucas, have been a part of this plan from the very beginning, even if you didn't know it." Lucas took the letter with trembling hands. As he read it, the truth began to take shape, but the words blurred before his eyes. What the letter said wasn't just a shocking revelation, it confirmed his worst fears. Beatrice and Ricardo had been playing him from the start, using him as a pawn for their own purposes while he was trapped in a web of manipulations. "Why? Why all this, Beatrice?" Lucas asked, his voice trembling, almost overwhelmed by disbelief. Beatrice didn't answer immediately. Instead, she began walking slowly toward the window, watching the rain fall endlessly. "Ricardo never accepted that I left him. He never accepted that I took control of the company, of his legacy, but his biggest mistake was thinking he could control me. So I used what I had at my disposal. You. My proposal wasn't just a desperate act, Lucas. It was a calculated move." Lucas sat down, still processing what he had just discovered. He hadn't just been part of the game between Beatrice and Ricardo. His involvement had been carefully planned from the beginning. They had both played with his life, using his vulnerability to fulfill their own desires for power and revenge. "And now what?" Lucas asked, staring at Beatrice. "Are you asking me to join you and destroy Ricardo?" Beatrice turned to him, her eyes gleaming with fierce determination. "No, Lucas. What I'm asking is for you to take control of your life. Because, in the end, this game isn't about me or Ricardo. It's about you. You are the piece that can change everything. If you decide to move forward, you can be more than a pawn. You can be the king, the one who makes the decisions. You just have to do what's right." But Lucas wasn't sure what the right thing was at that moment. How could he trust someone who had manipulated him from the beginning, What would he do if he followed the path Beatrice was offering him? Before he could say anything more, Beatrice's phone rang. She glanced at it briefly before answering with a serious tone. "Yes, I know. Okay, let's do it," she said, hanging up immediately. "What's going on?" Lucas asked, concerned. Beatrice looked at him with a cold smile. "It's Ricardo. The game is about to intensify, and you, Lucas, have to decide which side you're going to be on." The decision Lucas had to make was harder than he had ever imagined. Despite the truth revealed by Beatrice, the feeling of being trapped between two enemies manipulating his life was overwhelming. He felt like a pawn on a chessboard, and though he now understood the rules of the game, he wasn't sure how to play to win. Beatrice's words echoed in his mind as he walked back to his apartment. "You are the piece that can change everything." But did he really want to be that piece? Did he want to keep being the center of their game, their revenge? Or was there a way to break this cycle of manipulation and find an escape? The next morning, Lucas woke with a strange feeling. He knew something important was about to happen, something that would mark the end of this entire mess. He decided he couldn't wait any longer. He had to confront Beatrice one last time, but this time he wasn't going to be her pawn, no more. When he arrived at Beatrice's mansion, the atmosphere was different. The opulence of the house, normally so imposing, now seemed distant, cold, almost unbearable. Lucas felt like everything he had experienced there had been a lie. Beatrice was waiting for him in her office, sitting behind her desk, with the same calculating look, as if she had been expecting this moment. "Lucas," she began, "I know you've been thinking a lot. I know the dilemma you're in isn't easy. I want you to make a decision, and I want it now. There's no more time." Lucas looked her straight in the eyes. He wasn't going to be manipulated any longer. He had spent weeks trapped in her web, but he couldn't live in the dark anymore. He had to risk it all, even his life, to end this cycle of lies. "I'm not staying in this game, Beatrice. I won't be your pawn, nor Ricardo's. I've seen enough. I've heard your lies. This game, this plan, it's all been a lie, and I don't want to be part of it anymore." Beatrice watched him in silence, her expression unwavering, not showing a hint of surprise. Finally, she stood up from her chair and walked to the window. "You have no idea what you're saying, Lucas. You're giving up everything, the life you could have, the power, the control, everything I offered you." "What you offered me was a chain, Beatrice. And I don't want to live with my hands tied by your revenge. I won't be another piece in your war with Ricardo." The silence filled the room. Finally, Beatrice sighed and approached him. "All right. If that's what you want, you're right about one thing. This game has been a lie, but not for the reasons you think. The truth is, I never cared about your life or your problems. I only used you for a much greater purpose, but now I see that what you've really done is ruin my plans." Lucas frowned. What did she mean by that? "Ricardo was never my real enemy. The real enemy was the system we created together, the machinery of power, money, manipulation. I've always played with fire, but now the fire is consuming me." Lucas felt a sense of bewilderment. Was Beatrice being sincere now? Or was this just another one of her tricks? It didn't matter. What he did know was that he couldn't keep being part of her game. Not of Ricardo's, nor Beatrice's. "You're going to destroy yourself, Beatrice. This system, your empire, it's all going to collapse, and I don't want to be a part of it." Beatrice looked at him one last time, her face transformed by an expression Lucas had never seen before. Vulnerability. A fleeting light of regret shone in her eyes, but it disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. "Then, Lucas, I give you what you wanted. Freedom. Do with it what you think is right." With those words, Beatrice took a step back, and Lucas knew he was facing one last chance to escape. But not just from her, from Ricardo, and from everything that had been tangled in his life since the moment he agreed to the marriage. Now he understood that what mattered most wasn't money, power, or revenge. It was freeing himself from the lies that had kept him trapped. Lucas walked out of the mansion with a weight on his shoulders, but also with a freedom he hadn't felt in a long time. He had taken control of his destiny, and for the first time in months, he felt free. As he walked toward his car, he thought about his mother, his sister, everything he had done for them, everything he had sacrificed. But he knew now he had a second chance. He wasn't going to let his life be determined by the whims of the powerful who played with the fate of others. And though he didn't know what the future would hold, Lucas finally understood one thing. The only game worth playing was the one where he was free. Now, the real fight began. And so we reach the end of our story. Lucas, after facing so many lies and manipulations, finally finds his freedom. But the question is, can he really escape the shadows of the past? What will come next for him after leaving behind Beatrice and Ricardo's control? Lucas's story shows us that sometimes our greatest enemies are not the ones we see, but the ones we create through our own decisions. If you've enjoyed this journey full of unexpected twists, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss the next episode. What would you do in Lucas's place? Would you accept Beatrice's proposal to save your family, or would you risk it all and fight for your freedom? We want to hear your opinion. Leave us your comment below. Share your thoughts on how we would face difficult decisions in life. Thanks for joining us on this adventure. See you in the next video with more surprises, more twists, and more stories to tell. See you soon.